So welcome everybody. This topic actually was interesting. Jim always gives me good topics, so it's always fun. I went back and looked, and we actually touched on this topic a few years ago. So in my brain, that means I got to figure out a different way to talk about it, right? So I think Jim does that on purpose to drive me crazy. But I hate to be repetitive, so I'm always trying to figure out a different way to approach the subject and find something different. So when we talk about understanding porcelain, opacity, and translucency, a lot of things kind of come to mind for me. First off, let's make sure my remote is working. There we go. Okay, so when we talk about opacity to translucency, it's really kind of a difficult subject in the sense that there are so many different materials today, so many different options that we use, and so many different ways we use them that I almost feel like some of these words go out the window. So first, let me just kind of break down some of the key elements here. And as usual, I put too many slides in. I just finished this about 5 to 12, so I might not know which slide comes up next. If you see me guessing, you'll know why. I'm a last minute guy as usual. But let's break this down as very simple versions. One, opacity really means something that it stops light from passing. I want to kind of think of it more in the ceramic and material world. And I think we tend to use some of these words a little bit more literal to the real world. For us, everything we do is about light interaction, how materials work against dentin or against enamel, with cements behind them, with light coming in from the facial area, light reflecting from the sides. All our materials really work with light. So if we keep it really simple, opacity simple for us means it stops the light from going into places we don't want it to go to. And translucency really means that it allows sunlight to pass. And I want to be clear about the sunlight because almost all our materials we use are really translucent. So it's not like we really work with highly opacified materials anymore, especially in the monolithic world. But that's going to throw us for another curve that hopefully I'll try to hit as we get through this. Think of translucency as how much light we want to pass, because there is no such thing, and I always joke and say, there is no such thing in transparency, both in politics and in dental materials. There is no such thing as pure transparency. Everything is really about how much translucency there is. So even your most translucent powder, most translucent monolithic material, all of them have some amounts of opacity in them. The numbers roughly is about 6% is the most translucent we can make a material. We can't make something that's pure glass, that's completely see-through, because even pure glass is not completely see-through. There are some opacified particles in it. So translucency and transparency are kind of two different things, although I think I'm using the word transparency later on, but I'm just kind of using it as a scale to compare how much more translucent we can be and what we want it to be. Okay, so for me, how do I get that? I think most of you already know that I'm controlling most of my opacity to translucency through the layering process. And how I can get that is really from using more opacified or thicker materials, and I'll explain that as we go on, to using more translucent materials or more opacified materials. So I want to say that again so we're all really clear. How do I make transitions? Well, in the areas where I want opacity, I'm either using more opacified materials or thicker materials. And in the areas where I want to have more translucency, I'm either using more translucent materials or maybe thinner materials. And in this case, I have thicker mamelons on top to bring back the opacity. And I'll kind of explain as I go through that. And that's how I'm really starting to create what I see. Also, I want to be clear, I think in the next issue, you guys will see, hopefully, in IDT, I just wrote an editorial called A View from Afar. And it's actually, not only is it an article that I'm working on in general, it's actually my new lecture format that I'm kind of working on for 2023. And the reason that I wrote this quick editorial was because one of the flaws I think we really have in dentistry today is this micro and macro views. We're getting so used to retracting teeth and looking close at the teeth that we're losing the ability to understand what teeth really do and how they really work. And I guess my newer lectures are going to be kind of focused a little bit more on the face, although I've been focusing on that the last year or two, but even more, because what's happening is we're getting so focused on the minute micro details that we're losing the ability to understand chroma and value and texture and transitions and opacities and translucency. So if you get a chance, read that editorial, and I think you'll probably see in some of my future lectures coming up that I'm going to start talking a lot more about facial feature into colors and aesthetics. And the summary of probably that is this. When we retract lips and we're really looking at close-up of teeth, you're going to notice lots of chroma, lots of texture, lots of translucencies, different opacities, and all these things that play in there. And when you show patients that, they don't like it, right? They think they're supposed to be white and straight and no embrasure. But when you back away from the face, the teeth actually appear brighter than they appear when they're close up because of the skin tones and the lips and so forth. So not a topic for today, but it was on my brain because I just wrote about this. Also, anybody in the Virginia area, I'll be doing a pretty cool lecture with one of my doctors, Bernadette Sava, and we titled it The Dental Detectives, and the goal of it is really going to be trying to figure out how to avoid all the challenges that we face or the failures that can potentially come up and how to weed your way through those before it's too late. So that'll be in September at the ACP meeting. I think it's open to most people to come. You have to sign up, and more information about it, I don't know. So, okay, well, we get into opacity and translucency. You know, I look for different opacities and different translucencies in different teeth. Older teeth, as an example, tend to have much more opacified looks to them, right? Where whether they're bright or dark, you kind of get a different, I don't even like the word opacity, it's more of a density, right? Where light kind of gets that little more chalkiness on the inside and how it reflects and absorbs. Whereas when more youthful teeth, we want more of that translucency to pass through the teeth, but yet we got to keep value up. So again, we're kind of fighting the game of, if I put too much opacity into something, then what tends to happen is I lose the ability to control what the light does. It just becomes either reflective or absorptive. If I put too much translucency or I lower value too much, and then I don't have the brightness that I want. So the game is kind of balancing those two things over and over again, which makes it really challenging. I kind of like the word density better, to be honest with you. I think density is really a better fit. And there are times when I have no choice but to incorporate opacity, like in a case like this where someone had an accident, they broke their teeth, and I have to fill space. When I have to fill all this space, I know right off the bat I need opacity. And to be honest with you, some of the opacity that I need, I'm not going to get out of a normal powder. I may have to modify my opacious powders. I may have to add in a fluorescent stain sometimes, but I have to do something to bridge that gap between where there is air, where there is nothing, and where there is tooth structure. And to do that, it becomes your knowledge of the materials that you're using and how to create that opacity that you really need. So in a case like this, and by the way, this is probably a 15-year-old case, you'll notice how thin my little wall of opacity is. That wouldn't work with a normal opacious material, even with my effect chromas or opacious dentin materials. I actually had to add some fluorescent stains or use something like a flow dentin today in the Lumex kit, where I have a little bit more fluorescence into the powder, because the powder won't have enough opacity on its own to do what I want it to do. And then once I do that, I can go back to figuring out now where do I want the translucencies, where do I want the light to pass through those areas. So when I work on these cases, and again, I was thinking of this, 15 years ago as I was developing a lot of my lecture sequences of that, how do I make that work? How do I mask something and yet make it look translucent at the same time? And you can see in this case, it kind of worked out fairly well. Again, it's an old case. It's nothing that I'm really, crazy about. But just to go back one, you can see I have zero space to work with in the cervical and in the mid-third areas, and I have too much space in the rest of the restorations. So the goal was to manage those restorations by using my materials to give me the opacity and the translucency I need, which is why feldspathic is still kind of king for me because I really have the ability to do all that with feldspathic materials, where when I get into monolithics, it changes the game a little bit, and I'll kind of touch on that a little bit as hopefully we have time to go through it all today. If I want pure translucency, that changes the game also. I don't really need to worry so much about opacity, and I'm really looking about more how much translucency do I want from my enamel materials or my filter materials, as I call them most of the time. So for me, if I want light to pass, I want to think about how much light. Like I said, 6% is about all you're going to get. But I could also use enamels that are 30% opacity, right? Or whiter or brighter enamel. So I'm thinking of how much light do I actually want to pass through the process. In this case, this was just an old window veneer case where the young patient had some spaces, and our goal was really just to close those spaces. So yeah, I needed a little bit of opacity in those areas, but honestly, I didn't need much because I'm really going to make a halo around most of these teeth. And I'm going to utilize the natural tooth and the coloration and the light kind of passing through it. So you'll see my veneers that I made here. These are just old window veneers that are basically almost all transparent, except for where those finishing points are, or my halo points are around that. But I mean, look at how translucent they are, right? You can see the difference between where I have opacity and where I have translucency. So Jim, this might be the perfect example of opacity and translucency, right? Right next to each other. But here's the difference is, like that, it looks so extreme. When I put it intraoral, that changes because now we're utilizing the coloration of the tooth behind it to actually blend in and give us some of the opacity or translucency back that we wanted. So you can kind of notice as I'm sliding these in, how you don't see, let me go back one, so you're really kind of clear. I mean, look at how translucent I really am. And by the way, getting my ceramic that translucent isn't easy, right? Sometimes you got to overfire it or throw a dot of a glazing paste into it or powder into it just to kind of really make sure I'm going to create that crazy translucency that I want. But when I put this in the mouth now, look what starts to happen. You can see as I'm sliding in, you can still see all those translucencies, but yet as it goes up and covers the tooth, you don't see that junction between that line and that line anymore, which is the beauty of utilizing teeth behind us. And here's our final result of just window veneers, additive. And again, this case has got to be 10, this might have been some of the first window veneers I ever did, maybe 12, 15 years ago. So I'm just pulling them out because sometimes I get tired of showing the cases. I feel like guys get bored of same old cases over and over again. I have so many new ones coming up that I'm kind of organizing now. So anyway, you get the point, right? You can see how I incorporated both opacity and translucency there. And that's really just about using the powders. So those more opaque powders for me are going to give me more light blocking materials. The more translucent I get, the more the light is going to be able to go through the material. And the more transparent I get, or translucent, the more the light is really going to be able to go through the material. So it's really about managing the light and the spectrum. I think most of you know that with powders, they're designed from the manufacturers, VITA being one of them, obviously, where we're creating the most opacified material on the inside, the dentin, which is less opacified, and then the enamels. The areas that we really struggle with as technicians are going to be these two areas here. The cervical third, which is really difficult because it's the thinnest area that we work in. And then the incisal third, which is usually the most difficult for two reasons. One, I know everybody's going to be shaking their heads when I say this, your doctors usually don't prep enough away right in this incisal third. So I get it, I'm in the same boat. Prep guides, reduction copings are our best friends for these. But if they do, or if they don't, our really bigger issue is transitioning from where the tooth ends to what I call AIR, which is just air, meaning there's nothing there. And you'll notice that little red patch that I have here, well, that's how I use my Mamelon materials, to hide that transition between opacity and translucency and allow my materials to control it for me. And I try to keep that format whenever I'm going. So if I want to increase the chroma or the value, I can use opacities and translucencies, but I can't really do it in a way without figuring out how to boost the value or absorb chroma. I need to kind of think through the opacified particles that I really need to utilize, or the translucent materials that I need to utilize. So I'll show you an old case quick. This case is again a real long time ago, but and I won't walk you through the whole thing just because I've showed it a billion times years ago in lectures. But this is kind of the perfect example of what I'm talking about, where we're looking at a case that we want to restore, and you'll notice right away, besides for all the ugly stuff that's going on in here, that I'm going to need to mask this tooth drastically. Hold on a second, I'm going to have to grab something.
I need to grab something, unfortunately. I'll do the floor. Sorry.
Okay, sorry, there's a little interruption. So you'll notice this tooth right here, you'll see that there is how dark it is, right? So right away you should kind of get the path that, go ahead. Sorry, I'm in the office and somebody had to come in. Right away you'll notice that there's a little path that's going to be a problem here to mask this dark color. So you're kind of thinking right away, what am I going to do that, right? So my brain is going, I need opacity, but at the same time, I want the teeth to look real, so I need translucency. So we're going to prep the teeth, and maybe the one thing we're going to do is try to ask the clinical partner to prep a little bit more of that tooth structure. But I think you guys all know already, both clinical and laboratory, when you see colors like this, we have a problem, right? Because these grays and kind of darker colors are almost impossible to mask. So I know at the end, I mean, this root is dark. We could have internally bleached it. It's a whole nother conversation for a different day. But the bottom line is I know we're going to have gray shadowing here. So I need the most opacity I can get in this area and still allow me to have some sort of translucency that makes the teeth look real. So I spent most of my time building up this little core with opacious materials, added fluorescence in them. And the goal was to actually, I didn't put all the slides in, but I actually painted this dye black, and I put some glazing medium in here to put this on so I could see if I really masked out those dark colors, right? And in the end, it got pretty close to what I wanted it to be. And then I went and did my normal build up and all the things that I did, put my marginal finish line, a millimeter to the contact, all the normal stuff that you would normally do because this patient would have had black triangles otherwise. So in the end, you can see this is a full coverage crown, and it looks pretty bright here next to the other teeth. But when we go to put that in the mouth, it actually is going to work out fairly well. Is it perfect? No, I can see that grayish hue for sure. And again, this is 10, 15 years ago. You can see the grayish color up by the tissue. The good news is she doesn't really show all the way up there, but you can see that I've accomplished mostly the translucency and opacity that I needed into it. And the biggest part is, again, from the full face, when the patient smiles and what they show in a normal world works. Could I have fixed everything here? Yeah, there are other ways we could have talked about this, but not for today's lecture. But that was a very interesting case a long time ago that I did. So it worked in that scenario. When I'm trying to mask things, I think you guys already know that sometimes it's really difficult to do that in the small spaces that we're working in, especially when we have a zirconia or a lithium silicate substructure. I don't have a lot of room to put extra powders on, especially if I'm in monolithic world. I'm more layer guy. I think I do a lot more micro layering than anything else, or full layering, depending on the case. But when you have these really small spaces, it becomes more challenging. So you guys need to understand that, like I said to you before, anything that has opacity to it basically stops light from going through, like opaque materials. Anything that is translucent, like your dentin materials or your enamels, allows light to go through. The question is, how much light will it allow to go through? And that really varies on the material that you're using, the manufacturer of the material, and the firing schedule of the material. But just to break the misnomer that everybody seems to have, most dentin materials are only about 40-something% opacified. They range from 38 to 44. So what that means is that anytime I'm using dentin, and you normally use it about 8/10 to a millimeter thick, that means that about 60% of the light is actually passing through that dentin and hitting the substructure, whatever that substructure may be, metal, zirconia, lithium silicate. Your fix to that most of the time is to use opacious materials or chroma materials. But challenge there is what you're missing is the opacious materials are more opacified, but that more opacified is really based on thickness. Because they're more opacified at 1 millimeter thick, it would look almost more like that. Problem is you never have a millimeter thickness to work with opacified materials. You tend to work with them in 2/3 of a millimeter, which means they're much thinner, which means they're much more translucent. So yes, putting opacious dentin somewhere at 2/3 of a millimeter doesn't really help you, I guess is the point I'm trying to make, unless you can really increase chroma, increase fluorescence, or increase thickness, which normally you won't have the ability to do. So a lot of times I'll do that just by putting fluorescent materials into it or raising the chroma levels to get the light absorption up a little bit. But on its own, opacious dentin is not the greatest masker at thin areas. So it doesn't really give you what you need in this cervical third for me. And that's why a lot of times I'm going to modify that. There's two quick charts here I'll show you just to compare, because for those of you who have transitioned from VM9 to Lumex or whichever one you're in, I want to make sure that you're understanding the difference in the systems, right? So with the VM9s, most of the chroma pluses and effect chromas fall more in this range right about here. But our base dentin and our transfer dentins are kind of here on the scale from 0 to 100 opacity. Whereas with the Lumex material, it's a little different. You actually have an old school opacious dentin and a dentin. And our base dentin or our dentin there kind of falls in between the base dentin and the transfer dentin of the VM9. But the opacious dentin is actually a lot more opacified than the base dentin. So it's kind of back to an old scale system of opacious dentins and dentins. And it's important that you understand those just because you're choosing your powders. I always say it's a fancy chess game, and I'll show you what I mean. So if I get a little more detailed in that, you'll notice that enamels, dentins, chroma dentins, opaque dentins. But look at the one that kind of goes all the way to the most opacified. That's the fluorescent dentins or the fluorescent mammalian materials. And why is that? That's mostly because the fluorescence reflects the light differently than other materials. It's technically not more opacified. It just interacts with the light differently and changes the light reflective. So this is why the fluorescence that I always talk about in my lectures is so critical for us. So really what separates us from ceramists or a good ceramist from a staining glaze person, hopefully, is the ability to understand how to move your pieces around. And I've always equated that to a chess game. I'm not a chess player. I wish I was, but I understand the ability of these pieces. Some of them are really limited in what they can do. And the queen, as an example, could do some amazing things, how she moves through the board. Well, your job is to understand your materials that well. Which of the materials are really just the pawns that you just utilize for certain things, and which one of them can really do some magical stuff. And usually the magical stuff materials are things like fluorescent materials, fluodentins, mammalian materials, some effect materials. These are the ones that can really do some magic for you. Where the other materials are really just kind of basically opacified or translucent. And it's your job to figure out on your chessboard which ones work in which area and how to use them the best way. So for me, understand that light passes through all of your ceramic materials, and our job is to figure out how much material we need to use in thickness, or how much chroma or opacity, or I should say translucency, do we want in that material to change the reflection of light. You already know that most of the chroma is in the cervical areas, most of the value is in the mid-third, and the translucency is much more towards that incisal edge. But how much material you use is going to change that game. How much thickness do I have here as compared to here as compared to here changes how my choice of material selection is going to happen. Maybe I need something with a lot more opacity because I'm going to make it really super thin. Or maybe I need something with a little less opacity because I'm going to make it a lot thicker and I want to have more light interaction. I have to be thinking through that process. And I think this is the difference between what we call the monolithic world to the layering world. In the layering world, I'm controlling the light, where in the monolithic material, my material is controlling the light. And I don't always have the ability to control the thickness in a monolithic crown. I might have 0.5 of a millimeter cervical, a millimeter on the middle third, and then a millimeter and a half towards the incisal edge. But it's one material. And now my staining material is going to have to do the work for me and kind of trick the interaction of the light. But the minute I put my stains on the outside of the restoration, everything really reflects from the surface. So you don't really create the same depth. Now, that's not to say that monolithic materials don't look great today, because boy, they're getting better and better. I'm using them more and more. I'm just saying what separates us the most is still having the ability to do some micro layers and a little bit of edited ceramics, because everybody has a lot of the same monolithic materials. Everybody has a lot of the same staining materials, same libraries in your milling machines. So really the separation is your knowledge of what, where, and when to use them. Here's a great example of something that I was just working on. I didn't finish this case yet. I'm actually just starting it. But the doctor sent me the case. This is actually one of Dr. Bernadette's cases. And she forgot to put the photos in Dropbox, right? So I was kind of rushing to get it done. And I said, oh, let me just press it out. I looked at a picture of the patient pre-op. And I thought, okay, not so bad, and it should be fine. So I took some pressing materials and I pressed out a case for, we're going to layer both of them, but I pressed them out a little more full contour-esque just to kind of see where I'm going. And when I pressed it out, I thought everything was fine. And then I went back and I looked at the prep shade photos. And you're going to see what happened. I actually wound up pressing out a second set. Now, again, they're not done yet. So I'm just kind of getting them ready. But I wanted you to look at the two different sets when I put them on the cast. So here is one set with the more translucent material, and here's a second set with the more opacified material. And you can kind of see the difference, that you can see some of the yellow coming through. Here you don't see as much as the yellow coming through. So it's about the opacity of that material that's kind of controlling some of the light, which is fine. Challenge is, then I get the prep shade photos. And I'm like, okay, now I got a problem, because this is the worst challenge for us, is managing this grayish hue of a look. And that's almost impossible to mask no matter what the material is. Unless you're in PFM, then it's not so bad. But otherwise, it's really difficult to manage. So what I did was I asked the doctor if she wouldn't mind just trying them both in as an evaluation, just kind of figure out where I needed to go. And that's what she did. So she took my first set, she put them in the patient's mouth, and you can see, wow, they look super white and bright, and I got no problem masking, right? It looks like I did a perfect job. And then I did the same thing with the second set. But here's the problem. That's not really what's happening, because what you're seeing in this photo is not really adhering to the tooth itself. It's just my white coping. It doesn't really have any grab on to the underlying substructure. So what I did was I actually took a little pencil and I blackened my dye so I can kind of get the idea. And then I'm filling the restoration with glazing medium. And I actually sent these two restorations to the doctor with the glazing medium. Because again, you need a medium to grab onto the tooth. You're going to get coloration from the tooth behind it. So now look what happens when I put the glazing medium in. Same two restorations. You can see how much more light is passing through this one because it's adhering to the tooth. And now you can almost start to see that this looks okay, but the definitely value is going to be a different. And even in the brighter materials, value is going to be a different. Watch what happens when I put the black dye behind it. Now you see how my value completely drops. So this is where monolithic materials become so challenging, right? Because even in the more opacified ingot, I'm still getting a lot of gray bleed through. And by the way, that's a millimeter 0.5, my coping there. So a millimeter 0.5 MO most opacified ingot, I'm still getting bleed through. Now, hopefully it won't be as bad in the mouth. So here's the trying in the mouth. And you can see the doctor put the two restorations in. At this point, they don't look terrible, but I am seeing the grayness come through in the more translucent ingot. When I get to the more opacified ingot, it's not terrible, but come on, you can read that this is gray, right? You can definitely read that this is gray. Now, you're probably thinking, well, Peter, we're in a 2M world. I don't need it to be this white. You don't. Problem is I need something that's going to mask, and the only way to get that is with a brighter color in a really small area. So I'm probably going to wind up going more with a more opacified ingot, because if I go here, I'm going to lose it, right? I'm going to not have what I need to do. Also, something interesting, I'm going to go back a slide for a second. Before the glaze paste was in, look at how white and bright that looks, right? That's the veneer part of it. Now, as I go forward, notice how that changes when you put that in the mouth and it starts taking on some of the coloration underneath it. In truth, this is that same white ingot. And now look at it next to that natural tooth, right? So you think I might have been too bright? I'm not. I'm not sure I'm going to be bright enough on that number 9, because I'm really going to need that white ability. And then I can stain down and add chromas and powders on top of that to finalize it. So the point I was trying to make with showing you that is really simple. When I'm in layering world, I have the ability to choose. When I'm in monolithic world, I have an ability to choose, but my brain power has to shift a little bit. I have to start thinking more about space that I have and what I'm looking to achieve. So when you work through ingots, and this is an old ingot shot, but I think you kind of get the idea that 1 millimeter thick, if that's what your restoration is, I have a certain amount of opacity. If I use a more opacified ingot, like an MO, like I would have here, well, I'm going to have a much more opacified ingot. But again, I only have that opacity at the thickness that I work in. You don't normally have that amount of thickness. So what starts to happen is, in order for me to get the same opacity, I need to change the ingot selections a lot of times. So my point with the case that I just showed you is, I might have to go with the most opacified ingot I have for that number 9, and then more of a translucent ingot for the number 8, to make those two work together, because otherwise the thickness of the materials is going to kind of really change the game for me. And I ask this question many times when I'm lecturing with live audiences, is what ingot would you choose for this case? Or I always say, what material would you choose for this case? And I put a picture of his case on the screen, and 90% of the people say lithium silicate right away. That's not the word they use. They use the curse words for that, but I always make sure I correct them and say lithium silicate. And then I say, okay, if you're going to use lithium silicate, which ingot would you use? And they always pick a ingot. And I'm like, but you have 8 teeth there. And some of them are out further, some of them are in further, some of them have different prep shades. How is it possible you can use one ingot? Because one ingot at different thicknesses is going to do 8 different things. So I wanted to kind of throw that in there, so I know we're such more of a monolithic world these days than ever before. I wanted to make sure that you're thinking through both sides of the materials. For me, feldspathic is still, I kind of say where it's at, right? I still kind of really like to use my feldspathic materials because it gives me the ability to really control that layering and put in my lines and create those translucencies and all the little things that I want to do inside the restoration that I kind of can't do as much with monolithic, or I can do with some micro layering. So that's kind of where I stick to more. I also wanted to show you, and I'm going to kind of run through this really quick, that if you're understanding the opacity, where your opacious materials will help you rather than hurt you. So let me give you a great example. This is something I use in hands-on courses a lot. I'm going to run through this really quick just to save us some time, but just to give you a basic understanding. You see the amount of space I have to fill. You know that the manufacturer provides for you a dentin out of the bottle that's supposed to give you your A1 shade, right? So a millimeter dentin, a half millimeter enamel should give you A1. Well, not necessarily true. So here's what I'm going to do. I want to take this space and I want to fill it to make my A1 restoration. So this is just for fun. I'm going to make the crown A1 like the doctor asked for. So here we go. So I'm not going to use any fluorescent materials here, by the way. I'm only going to use dentins and opacious dentins. So on the tooth here, which is actually the number 9, I want to make it A1. So what I'm going to do is actually go to a highly opacified opacious material. I know this is going to sound crazy for you guys, but even though I'm really going for A1 or 1M1, I'm going to use an opaque dentin or an effect chroma like A4 or EC5. that seems extreme. I get it. But trust me, there's a method behind the madness. So I'm really going to increase the chroma, but remember, I'm only using it at 0.2 of a millimeter. In this area here, I want to increase the values. I want to really brighten up my values. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to use maybe B1 or something even brighter, like an EC1, like a really white kind of material to help brighten up my line angles in these areas. And then on the incisal edge, for those of you who know me, I'm anti-C and D shades, but in this case, I break the rules and I might use a little bit of a C opacious material. Why? Because I want lower value, but I still want some opacity, or the EE6 maybe in my BM9 kit. And then because the doctor asked for an A1, I'm going to put a little A1 right there just for the fun of it, but I don't really need it. So now look what I did there. I used 4 opacious materials, 1, 2, 3, 4. And on the number 8, I'm using 0 opacious materials. Right, so I'm going to fire that really quickly. So that's just opacious materials on the restoration. And I think you can see right away that my opacious materials are giving me not only density, but kind of all the things that I want. Extra chroma interproximal, less chroma on the facial, value in that middle third, up and down the line angles, and a little lower value towards that incisal third. So that's 4 opacious dentin materials. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back and I'm going to build both crowns with 1 dentin. That's just a straight A1 dentin. So realize this has no opacious dentin materials behind it. This has 4 of them behind it. I'll build up my dentin, just A1. I'll use 1 enamel, in this case ENL or 57 or whatever you use. And I'll fire the crowns and come up with a little correction bake and I'm done. Now, remember I just flipped them. So I think you should already know that this is the one that has the opacious materials. This is the one that is straight dentin. And just so we're clear, I used 1 millimeter of A1 dentin and 0.5 millimeter of the enamel, just like the manufacturer recommends. Where here I use 4 opacious dentins and then maybe 0.8 of a millimeter of enamel dentin and 0.4 of a millimeter of enamel, right? It changes the measurements out a little bit. Now, when you look at those teeth, some of you probably look at it and say, oh, I like the more translucent one. You might, but I'm going to tell you that's not going to look half as good as in the mouth. I want density. I want some of this density in the mouth. Now, these aren't a real case. I didn't put it in the mouth, but I'm going to show you why we're wrong by not using those secondary materials. Here is an A2 shade guide under the restoration. Look at the value that I got with A1 powder with 1 millimeter thick. I don't really have an A1 value. And this is why our restorations look so low in value most of the time. Whereas look at the one that has the extra opacious materials in there. Look at the density compared to the A2 pen. You can see that I'm much more in that A1, 1M1 world, which is really where I want it to be. So again, your knowledge of using those powders becomes really critical, and then how you filter them out with your enamel. So all the powders that you use are about your playing chess with them and knowing how to use them, and how I filter them with my translucent materials really adds into the final look of that to make sure they all work together. So I get a lot of these cases where you can see right away that I have, a few nice color teeth and a few bad color teeth. And it's really challenging for me to kind of figure out how to work with them. And I kind of shy away from monolithics in these areas because I know they're just going to create more problems for me down the road, especially when I have, again, a nice looking coloration and all these gray or orangey hues underneath with lots more space. So for me, these are the kind of cases that even if I'm going to use zirconia or lithium disilicate, I'm really going to want to layer something. I want to try to control as much as I can in the layering materials as I can. So you'll notice that this is layered zirconia, and these are feldspathic veneers next to the layered zirconia, right? So did I mask perfectly? No, value is definitely a little down over here, but at least I got it somewhat in the ballpark. And when I come out in a monolithic world, you can kind of see it fits into the face. Also with zirconia, when I have those challenging spaces, a lot of times, or implants where there's more space, again, I'm going to go back to those opacious materials, or maybe I'll just use fluorescence instead, right? So the difference for me, I want the opacious materials more in metal ceramics, lithium disilicates, With zirconias, I want opacious materials, but I kind of have the ability to use more fluorescent materials, similar to metal ceramics. I can kind of just use fluorescent material. So I can kind of swap between the two, between metal ceramics and zirconia, fluorescence or opacity. Lithium to silicate, different challenge, because most of the time you're using lithium to silicate, it's more monolithic. And if you're layering, you have very small amounts of room to layer in. So that's really just about powder. It's really about choosing which powders to work in the best moment. Very difficult to create fluorescence in very thin areas, because then you have too much fluorescence close to the surface. So in a case like this, where I'm going I'm going zirconia, this is kind of where I fall more today. And what I mean by that is, yeah, I'm still fully layering restorations for sure. I enjoy it. And I think that's why dentists are seeking this out more and more. We get, 2 phone calls a week from doctors to do cases, and we're saying no most of the time. The reason is we're small and we can't do more. So yeah, I'm still layering a lot of feldspathic veneers and a lot of full layered crowns. We're also doing monolithic restorations, lithium to silicate and zirconia. Where I think our niche is, and where I hope your niche will be, is in the micro layering and the macro aesthetic of that. So in this case, I'm kind of going to do some of the layering, but look at my zirconia material. You can see I've already designed it where I have a thickness to that cervical at mid-third. I have my line angles kind of coming up, so I'm utilizing some of that zirconia material to help me. And then I'm going to start putting my powders on to enhance some of those things. And this will be maybe a fluorescent powder, a little cervical fluorescent powder here, something to kind of to increase that light kickback, and then layer a little bit of dentin over it, where I get that fluorescence up and down those line angles, which is really helpful for me. Then I can just do kind of a normal dentin buildup. And I don't mind if my dentin is only 0.6 of a millimeter, because I have the support underneath to create the right density. Then I'll finish that with my enamels, work through the case. It's kind of a combination implant full coverage. Here we go on the insert, and you can see that kind of blends pretty nicely. The difference between full coverage and then implants into what nature is, which is she wanted everything to look kind of natural, which is great. Right, so we finished off her case, and she has back to her normal happy smile again. I don't know why I made her take a mean picture just for the Okay, Jennifer, now that you're all done, I know. So in the end, it's all about managing the space. I got through this one pretty quick. I was going fast there, Jim. So in the end, it's all about managing space, right? And I don't care if the case is a newer case like Jessica's case I just showed you, or an older case like this where I actually used more of original lithium to silicate materials. My goal is the same. If I have 3/4 of a millimeter or have a millimeter of space, I have to figure out which is the right material to use, whether it's powders, how much opacity, how much translucency, or whether it's lithium to silicates. What ingot selection do I use? Do I use the same one for different teeth? And I'm going to say most of the time the answer should be no. Or lithium or zirconia materials, which today are becoming more and more translucent. It's almost funny because I'm sometimes choosing, I have the new VITA ML material, multi-layer, which is super translucent, and I'm kind of experimenting with it and starting to do some cases with it, and it's coming nice. But I'm going to tell you that there were some cases that I want to layer. That's probably not the best choice for me to use. I probably go back to my ST material, which is translucent, but not super, even though it's named super translucent. It's not as translucent as some of the newer materials. And that gives me the ability to have a little bit of opacity in the core at 3/4 of a millimeter, and then do my layering outside. So again, thinking through your materials is really the key selection to balancing that. And you can see here the difference when I have basically 2/3 of a millimeter or almost a millimeter of space, how I'm trying to balance those two out. And we put them in the mouth. I think they blend pretty well. Again, this is a really old case, but you kind of get the idea that one of those restorations is, a veneer, and one is a full coverage crown, and yet one's 2/3 of a millimeter and one is 1.5 millimeters, right? So we're trying to really make those spaces work. All right, Mr. Jim, I went through 140 slides. in a very short period of time. So I impressed myself that I got through it. Sorry for the little hiccup interruption. Somebody had to come in emergency and grab something in the office. But thank you guys for your time, and hopefully Jimmy will have some questions from the people out there. And I made through 140 slides.
Yeah, like always, it's always impressive, so I appreciate it. You did some great cases, and I think some great examples, opacity versus translucency, and in between. So let me, for the audience, let me finish up my side. I'll pull it back. Let's see here. I will make myself the presenter, go through a few last minute things, and we will go from there. And let's hide that. All right. So the those of you that are asking about CE, we are going to cover that, get that to you here in a few days. Just give us some time to process is all. And then a reminder that the webinar was recorded. It's going to be posted on our VITA North America YouTube channel in a few days. So please visit that. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of different webinars that Peter has done in the past and is scheduled to do in the future. These run a large gamut of different topics. So what Peter may have talked about today, he alluded to other things that he's already done. So I recommend really highly that you get onto the VITA North America YouTube channel, go through those, the webinars, recordings that we've done in the past, find a subject that you're interested in, and review that of what Peter has talked about. Here's a list of all of our reps if you need to get a hold of us. And then here's upcoming webinars that we still have scheduled for most of the rest of the year. Again, all sorts of different topics. So I hope to see you on another webinar soon. Peter's also been gracious enough to provide us with his contact information. As you can see, even during this webinar, Peter's a very busy person. He's always got things that have to be done. Working with a lot of dentists, a lot of customers on his own, other partners in the business. So if you call him or you email him, give him some time to respond. And then as soon as he can, he will respond as soon as possible.
All right. Jim, your screen's
not
coming up, just so you know. It's not, I don't see any of the changes. Maybe now, try it again.
Oh, no changes? All right, well, let's see here. Let me stop sharing.
Not sure. There you go. But yeah, in that box, it's not that important. There you go. It's not that important, but just so you know, it wasn't coming through. Okay.
Okay. Sorry about that, everyone. But Peter, here's Peter's information. So please get a hold of him if you have any questions, follow up after today or any other questions. But again, he does this for, for us, in favor for us and to support you as customers. But, his full-time job, isn't just answering questions from VITA customers. He's got a commercial lab going on that is very, very busy. So give him some slack if he doesn't get back to you right away. As far as questions go, one of the questions was, Peter, was the young lady with the window veneers, the two sets, how thin did you go on those?
They were about 0.2 of a millimeter, if that.
So very, very thin. And you did those by
they were done with
refractory.
Yeah, that piece, believe it or not, is it's probably at least 10, 12 years old. She was a very young girl who was going to her prom, and she really hated her spaces. She had been in ortho for years, and I used to show that case a lot. I haven't showed it in so long, so I don't remember the whole case of it. But the bottom line is they were 4-window veneers that I did on refractory materials back then. And boy, was that challenging to devest those and kind of keep that material together. And I was more concerned when the doctor had to slide those in the mouth. So, yeah, 0.2 of a millimeter, if that.
Yeah, wow, that's great. That's pretty thin. So, and I think it's probably, refractory is probably a more simpler, better way to go than maybe a foil technique, the old foil technique, especially today.
Yeah, I mean, today, to be honest with you, would I do that in a lithium to silicate material? I might, honestly, because I'd have more strength in the lithium to silicate material. The only thing that would change the game, speaking of opacity and translucency, is how much other space do I have to fill, right? So if I have to extend it 2 millimeters, then a lithium to silicate's a problem for me because I'm going to have to be super translucent here. I'm also going to be pretty translucent here. So that's going to be kind of a challenge for me. So I still choose feldspathic for a lot of those, but I've shown many cases where we've used either lithium to silicate or the evolved material, enamic, not enamic, I'm sorry, Mark II, right? The Mark II material where I'm milling feldspathic and keeping it very thin. So there's a lot of ways to go, but it really depends on how much space I have, what's the prep shade, and what's the final coloration or the color underneath that I'm trying to fill.
All right, and then I know traditionally we always do a more opacious layer first, and on top of that, transition to more translucent. But the question is there ever a circumstance that you layer a translucent material underneath an opacious material? And if so, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, so the truth of it is yes. Sometimes the circumstance is I made a mistake and I built too much translucency in, and I'm trying to finalize my case, and I'm going to wind up going back and maybe mixing a little dentin into my enamel. I want a little bit more of a masking material. But yes, there are also times in real cases where, especially like in single central world or 2-4 units, where you have these weird amounts of opacity that are very close to the surface. So yeah, I'm going to get the translucency inside, and I might mask them more on the outside with opacious dentin or just opacity. But remember that opacious dentin at 2/3 of a millimeter is not really the opacious dentin you think it is.
So that kind of leads to another question someone had. With limited space, is it best to use all dentin and no opacious dentin?
Yes, I don't want to say it's a trick question. It's a loaded question because there's not one cookie cutter method. It depends on, again, what is the prep shade I'm working from? How much space do I have to fill? And what is the final shade that I'm looking to finish with? The answer could be is yes, sometimes dentin can do it all. Sometimes I need to modify my dentin with adding some opacious. I can mix opacious dentin and dentin, right? There's no law against that. I can increase the opacity of my dentin a little bit, or I can choose a dentin that might be higher in value or higher in chroma. That will be more reflective or more absorbative, right? So I know everybody always wants a straight system, and I'm going to be wishy-washy and tell you it's really so dependent on that per case basis.
Yeah, I would imagine so. All right, another question here by Scott. I noticed when you layer in on the top half of your crowns, are you using a brush or an instrument to make the grooves?
So I'm going to be sarcastic and say, when you say the top half, you mean the incisal edge, right?
The incisal.
And I predominantly use a brush for like 99% of my building. I don't really use much else. I do flatten the brush out and kind of carve with it sometimes.
All right, and then if I make a sample of tabs from my porcelain, what thickness should they be?
I used to make tabs all the time. Usually we made them around between 5/10 and up to a millimeter, depending on what material it was. So the right answer is if you're in dentin, it should be between 8/10 to a millimeter. If you're in enamels, it should be 3/10 to 5/10, because those are the way you really use those materials.
Okay. All right, and I think I got one more question that was asked earlier. Um, if all things being kind of equal, would you choose to make a restoration out of zirconia or a metal framework?
Nothing is equal, right? So can I make a PFM look good? I think so. I think I'd still say that out of all the materials we have today, I could still probably do the most with PFM because of the thinness of the coping, right? I have the ability to make it 0.2 of a millimeter, and then I could do layering all the way through and surrounding margins and blah, blah, blah. Probably zirconia is second option for me because, again, I could get 4 or 5/10 of a millimeter, and I could change the coloration of the zirconia. Lithium disilicate, I don't want to say it's my least favorite. I think I kind of go to that third, although I have 2 big lithium disilicate cases on my desk right now, and those are chose for the right reason, meaning that maybe it's a veneer case where I want lithium disilicate on the edge, but I still have the ability to do some layering. Monolithically, we're probably more lithium disilicate than zirconia because I like monolithic lithium disilicate better for wear and posing. So it's really such across the board. I'm sorry if I sound wishy-washy on the answers, but I really try to choose the material for the case rather than let the case choose the material.
No, I think your wishy-washy response is correct, right? Because today's world is much different than a long time ago. We have different materials, monolithic stuff, zirconia, PFMs. We have CAD/CAM blocks that we mail out. And like always, instead of just taking a prescription and just doing what's asked, a technician's responsibility still should be to look at it and communicate with the dentist.
The truth of it is it was easier kind of in the past, right? Because when a doctor did an aesthetic case, a 10-unit case, they prepped 360 restorations and very reductive, and you had one space to fill. So you took your 10 PFMs, whether you did butt joints or not, and layered your materials, and how many materials you used was your knowledge of it. Today that's shifted because we're trying to be much more minimally invasive, which sometimes is great, sometimes it's not. And I have lithium disilicate, zirconia, hybrid materials, monolithic this, layer that, and then I have an implant next to all of that, right? So I have an implant at number 8, I have a veneer on number 9, I have a full coverage that we minimally prep because the patients, and now all of a sudden with all the materials and all the options and all the new layering materials, it's kind of a nightmare, to be honest. So I'll say this it sounds self-serving, but I so don't mean it that way. Our key to our future is still a lot to do with understanding materials, layering, micro-layering, and I get it how much monolithics are taking over, and I use them just like you guys do. But I can't stress enough that the future of your businesses has to do with your knowledge of what, where, and when to use it. And I think the course that we're going to do in Cali, hopefully I think in September or October, that's going to be the 2-3 day focus of what to use, when to use it, and how to kind of make work through the cases in the diagnostic world to figure out what's right for that patient at that moment.
Great. Well, Peter, like always, you tackled the topic, and I think you've done an excellent job as always. Information to these customers are ultimately the goal, to let them decide, let them work on things, let them trial and error, build their experience, and so forth. So I appreciate the time that you spend to try to educate all of us. So,
thank you.
Any last minute comments or?
No, honestly, just thank you. I'm going to dive back into some cases. I'm behind schedule, but I really do. I want to lock in our date for Cali because I'm looking forward to a real 2-day hands-on course again. I haven't done one in a while, so it's going to be a great course and fun, and I'm looking forward to that. So we'll get the dates out to everybody as soon as we can. Hopefully this week you and I will sew it up, Tim, and then forward to being out there with everybody.
Yeah, excellent. So yes, we'll do a 2-day workshop later in the fall. and get that out to everyone, post it. And it'll be an excellent workshop. It'll be a hands-on workshop that will cover a lot of things. So
3 days would be
looking forward to that. 3
3
days
days
would be better.
but I know it's hard for people. 2 days is fine, but yeah, I almost like it's okay. 2 will be good. I'll work it out for 2.
Well, those of you that are attending, if you have a preference, 2 day, 3 day, 1 day, let us know, and we will try to plan accordingly. So, all right. So so thank you again, Peter. Thank everyone for joining us today on the webinar. We'll let you get back to work, make some money, and we'll see you again next time on the next webinar. So thank you everyone for joining another VITA Academy webinar, and this will conclude today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.